Nice surprise. We have the state treasurer tonight in studio, and there's a lot on our plate. Yes, the rumors that we have a state treasurer here on Dan York's State of Mind are true. They're absolutely true, and Seth Magaziner is actually in studio to prove it, and he will join me momentarily. There's some interesting stuff going on in the world that he can react to immediately, and then we'll talk about some of the programs that the treasurer is working on. There are big issues financially for the state of Rhode Island chronically, so we'll see if we can tackle a whole bunch of those. Welcome into my State of Mind. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you aboard. We are going to hustle to our rundown tonight because there's, well, plenty to do. I thought there was a huge mischance last night in the televised CNN debate that had 18 million people watching. A couple of headlines randomly here. Volatility, Cruz holds steady. What else? The Trump and Rubio targets. The media plays this thing in such a fascinating way, and you're going to say, looking at the chubby guy on TV right now, well, Dan, you're the media. No, I kind of like the anti-media. I'm not necessarily subscribing to the idea that I'm the media, but I know I'm the media. This was the moment in time for everybody on that stage last night. Fire it, Kev.
Dr. Carson just referenced the single most important job of the president, the command, the control, and the care of our nuclear forces. And he mentioned the triad. The B-52s are older than I am. The missiles are old. The submarines are aging out. It's an executive order. It's a commander-in-chief decision. What's your priority among our nuclear triad?
Well, first of all, I think we need somebody absolutely that we can trust, who's totally responsible, who really knows what he or she is doing. That is so powerful and so important. And one of the things that I'm frankly most proud of is that in 2003, 2004, I was totally against going into Iraq because you're going to destabilize the Middle East. I called it very strongly, and it was very important. But we have to be extremely vigilant and extremely careful when it comes to nuclear. Nuclear changes the whole ballgame. Frankly, I would have said, get out of Syria, get out. If we didn't have the power of weaponry today, the power is so massive that we can't just leave areas that 50 years ago or 75 years ago, we wouldn't care. It was hand-to-hand combat.
He didn't understand the question. He doesn't know what the nuclear triad is. Irrelevant superlatives don't fill in the blanks. Headline, Marco Rubio, because of some copyright issues, we don't have the rest of that video, but Marco Rubio actually had to explain to the general television audience what the triad is. That Donald Trump couldn't figure out airplanes, missiles, and submarines should tell you he's not qualified to be the President of the United States of America. Sorry to be so tough on you Trumpettes out here, but here's the thing. Jeb, all he had to do was spit out, "Hey, Donald, too tough for you?" And game, set, match, the whole thing flips. It was a missed opportunity, a moment in time. And believe me, there'll be more, because he's not deep. He's not even this deep. He didn't know what Hugh Hewitt was talking about. And he wants to be the commander-in-chief with his finger near the button and the football in the next room. The moment of the night, though, was a classic. This is just, the headline is terrific, but the video is even better.
The guy's got a pair of twos, and we got a full house, and he's walking all over Obama. Mike, the surge worked. It worked. George W. Bush made mistakes, but he did adjust. I blame Obama for ISIL, not Bush. I'm tired of beating on Bush. I miss George W. Bush. I wish you were president right now. We wouldn't be in this mess.
I thought Lindsay was going to cry. I thought he was going to cry. You know, his energy and his reaction right there, for some reason, is not being harnessed in this race. I think he's at .00001. Nothing like the JV debate, by the way, right? But the JV debate was actually worth listening to, perhaps better than the varsity debate. But that was a classic moment last night. Probably politically risky, but still pretty funny. 38 scam, and that's exactly what it is. This whole process is just nothing but a show. Here's Eyewitness News coverage of the Oversight Committee's subpoena process yesterday.
Michael Corso's lawyer has already said He likely won't allow his client to talk about the failed $75 million 38 Studios deal to the House Oversight Committee.
He acted like an absolute child, and I don't understand where he thinks we're going to go with that.
Representative Dan Riley tells us the childish act was this text message sent from Corso's lawyer Michael LaPrezzera to Target 12 investigator Tim White. It reads in part, "It is not likely that I will subject my client to become the circus elephant of a three-ring circus being conducted by the ringmaster, chairwoman of the House Oversight Committee. That ringmaster would be Representative Karen McBeth."
I would say that wherever he got his law degree, that university must be very disappointed.
If his client does in fact want the truth to come out, he's the best person to come before us and share that with us.
It's been just short of 2 months since the committee restarted their hearings. They've issued a subpoena to Kurt Schilling that fell flat, another to an auditing firm that's described as a work in progress, and now these two new subpoenas.
Is it possible to get to the bottom of this? Is it possible to find out who knew what? You're already mentioning frustration at this point.
I think all working together, and I think that's been the key all along, and it's not just one body there is oversight. It's certainly all of you as reporters getting your piece and filling in the information, and us looking at that and somebody else picking it up. This isn't a one person or a one committee show here. This is everybody in the state.
You know, the acrimony aside, and I understand why Attorney LaPrezzera is frustrated. He's representing Michael Corso, and I'm certainly not going to defend Michael Corso here. But this is a three-ring circus in a sense. Listen, the Speaker of the House wants to put on a show, issue a couple of subpoenas, do the bare minimum, and be able to say down the line, hey, I tried. Okay? He doesn't let Karen McBeth do anything that she's not doing anything that he hasn't approved. The idea here is that we should have had nightly primetime hearings, made this a high-profile investigation, brought in every state representative and senator in 2010 who voted for that authorization, that legislation that enabled the borrowing for 38 studios. And we just haven't gone through, and there are dozens of other players that could be subpoenaed and fill in the gaps, aside from what the civil litigation has brought us. Instead, you've got this haphazard thing where the scoreboard reads Schilling not showing up, Corso probably not showing up. However, here's a headline that indicates something might be able to be chewed on here. Steve Constantino, the former finance chairman, and now a guy who's running the health exchange in Vermont, well-known family here, is showing up. His attorney today said that he'll be there. January 14th will be the date, but you know, don't hold your breath on learning something incredibly new. It's just a show. It's just a show. Hey, the Fed's raised their rates today, or a short-term rate. We got a headline here, and I really don't understand much of it. Because I am not a finance guy. But serendipitously, the treasurer was scheduled for the show.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome in.
Yeah, good timing.
What does this tell you?
Well, the first thing that it tells me is that the Fed believes that the economy is improving, that employment has gotten strong enough to the point nationally that they feel comfortable raising rates, and that they feel that inflation is high enough to justify raising rates. Because if inflation was too low and you were to raise rates, then you could risk throwing the country into another recession. So they don't feel that that is a risk in the short term. In terms of what it means for the state, what it means for Rhode Island's investments, the thing to understand is that this is probably the most widely anticipated move in the entire 100-plus year history of the Federal Reserve. They've been telegraphing this for months, that they were likely to raise rates, not a lot, but a little bit. So I think the market had already pretty much priced this in. The market was anticipating this and knew it was coming. So, you know, as we're filming this now, the Fed just made its announcement a couple of hours ago. We're not seeing a wild swing in the stock market in either direction.
No, a couple hundred points up.
Yeah, because
I think you're right.
That,
and by the way, I do know a little bit about this stuff, a little bit, but you're the expert here. I think your analysis is right on the money. What's it mean for our Rhode Island portfolio? What's it mean for your thinking in terms of investments for the state?
Yeah, so it's again, this was a very minor raise in the rate, 0.25%, so not a huge implication. But over time, if rates continue to come up, if the Fed continues to raise rates, I think there are positives and minuses for the state. The minus is that when the state issues bonds in the future, it's going to cost a little bit more because rates will be higher. But then I think it helps us with the pension fund, especially the portion of the pension fund that's invested in bonds and other types of instruments that are set to a fixed interest rate. So, hurts us a little bit on the bonding side, helps us a little bit on the pension side. But this wasn't a huge increase in rates today. So
for the
in
consumer, short-term
Yeah.
rate increase means what? A little bit more on the CD, perhaps?
Yeah, potentially. I think you see a little bit more on those kind of short-term notes. If you're talking longer-term bonds, 20 or 30 years, you're not going to see a huge change because, again, at that point in the yield curve, the market was already anticipating this. But I think what was most interesting from the Fed was not the fact that they raised rates, that was expected, but the commentary that they released along with that decision today, where they basically said, we're going to continue to raise rates over time, very gradually. So they're not going to come back, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in the next 6 months and raise rates again. They're going to let the market adjust to this, see what happens in the economy, and I think they're going to be very gradual and deliberate with future increases in the coming years.
Well, it's a pretty delicate situation because there's nowhere to go in the other direction.
And I think that's a factor is, when you have bad economic times, one of the best ways that the federal government can do something to stimulate the economy is to lower rates. If we were to fall into another recession right now, they wouldn't have been able to lower rates any further, really. And so I think they're thinking of that, hopefully we don't have another recession again for a long time, but one will come someday. And when that time comes, they want to have some tools in the toolbox to do something.
All right, well, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And the 38 Studios thing is an interesting conversation because there's a player in that game that the treasurer has had some things to say about and some decisions that he's made. We'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back with our first-year treasurer, Seth Magaziner. Time flies when you're having fun, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I bet. And taking over for Gina Raimondo is an interesting exercise, right? How'd she leave the office? Was it swept well? Was it clean?
Office was cleaned out.
Yeah.
No, it's been a tremendous honor over this last year. We've been working hard. We've been getting things done. But there's a lot to do. We're trying to dig the state out of a very deep hole.
She brought that office to a higher profile. Mm-hmm. You agree?
I do.
Because most people would know what the heck the General Treasurer does. She, in her battle for pensions, I think, and pension reform, changed the whole dynamic of it. I want to talk to you about that subject matter coming up in a second, but do you feel a sense of elevated attention to the Treasurer's office?
I think it's always been an important office. We're overseeing more than $15 billion of state funds between the pension and the college-bound fund and some other funds. So it's always been important, and it's important in every state. But I do think that when Governor Raimondo was treasurer, the profile of the office in the public's eyes certainly increased.
I want to come back to some of the things that she did and your follow-up on it, but Kat, throw me a headline here because there's a couple of subject matters I think are worth catching up on. Not all of these are contemporary headlines, but they are catch up with the treasurer type of headlines. 38 Studios has a lot of players in it, but one of the financial advisors was this Southwest company that had a lot of people puzzled. Mm-hmm. How can they be sued, and they are being sued by the state of Rhode Island for the advice that they gave in the process of the whole bond issuance, and yet still be in another place within state government and advising on finances? You made a change.
Yeah, so we decided to let that financial advisor go for Southwest, the one that was involved in the 38 Studios situation, and replace them with a new advisor called Public Resources Advisory Group, PRAG. And I'm very excited about it. PRAG is one of the top-ranked financial advisors in the country. They work with New York, California, Virginia, a number of other large states. But they've never worked in Rhode Island before, which I think is a good thing. I think you want somebody new to come in with a fresh set of eyes, look at the state's finances critically, and work with us to make changes that need to be made.
And what is their actual consultation specificity? What is it they are what are they advising on that you guys in the office can't figure out yourselves?
Well, so that's a good question, and because one of the things that makes Rhode Island somewhat unique is that we don't have an Office of Debt Management anywhere in state government, and that's something that I've been talking about the last few weeks. And so a lot of things that in other states are done in-house have been pushed off on consultants and advisors in Rhode Island, which I don't think is a healthy thing. So the short-term fix is bring in a better advisor. A longer-term fix is I think we need to have some talent in-house, either in our office or elsewhere in state government, so that we're getting good, impartial advice on particularly the state's debt issues.
Kev, I'm going to tell you, can you grab headline number 4, just because the treasurer brought up either a direct or related conversation here. See if you can find that for me. Yeah, that would be nice. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
This is a recent headline talking about how we borrow money. This is all part of what you're talking about, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So I was asked to come and speak at the Senate 38 Studios hearings, and I wasn't, able to talk much about how 38 Studios came about because that was years before I came into office. But I thought, all right, well, maybe I can use this as an opportunity to offer some ideas for what we should do going forward, ways that we can avoid making those kinds of mistakes again. And one of the things that became obvious to me in my research for that presentation is that the state's debt management and oversight is severely lacking. So 38 Studios involved a bond deal, one that never should have been approved. But there are lots of other examples of bad decisions with debt being made across the state. Woonsocket pension obligation bond, Central Falls debt, which was part of why they went into bankruptcy. You had RIPTA back in the 90s taking out 20-year loans to pay for 12-year buses. And the examples just keep mounting and mounting. And I think part of the reason is that there's nobody keeping an eye on this. Rhode Island has more than 100 entities that can issue public debt between the municipalities, the fire districts, the water districts, the quasi-publics, and more than 100 different entities that can issue state debt, and nobody in the state level has been keeping an eye on all of them.
So what's your constitutional authority over that? Any?
Or
are you more an advisor?
Well, so in the past, the state's role has been virtually none of the above. I think the view has been, well, these municipalities and quasis, the state's not on the hook for their debt, so it's not the state's business. Well, I think it is the state's business.
Okay.
Because
well, I think that's great. Speaking of long-term debt, are you bullish or bearish on Gina Raimondo's idea to take $500 million and amortize it for 30 years for truck tolls?
Yeah, so from what I've seen from the plan, you can do it that way. You can, float a bond, fix more bridges faster, and ultimately over the full, I think it's through 2034 that they project you get to a 97% level of bridges being in good condition. If you did a pay-as-you-go, then it would be less borrowing, but you wouldn't necessarily fix as many bridges
the middle
over time.
ground is that you could float a general obligation bond, have it part of the general fund. But everybody's worried, and the governor's the governor's worried about, I think, the discipline to be able to have the budget continually fund what needs to be done, both in finance and in non-finance.
Well,
and
and
so she's trying to create a separate authority.
Well, I think the question is, how do we do this in a way where the taxpayers don't have to be on the hook? And with a revenue bond, there is some separation there, where the only thing that's backing a revenue bond would be toll revenue, and if the toll revenue wasn't sufficient, the taxpayers wouldn't be on the hook. With a GO, the taxpayers probably would.
Are you carefully not weighing in on this?
No, I mean, I've had many conversations with the governor and the speaker and others. I'm with her on the basic concept that we need to fix the bridges. I think tolling revenue from but tolling revenue from large out-of-state trucks, I think, makes some sense. But there's more than one ways to skin a cat, so we continue to look at it.
Definitely handled. We'll come back and cover a couple of issues. And the pension thing has always been important to the Treasurer's office. What the local communities are doing is problematic still. Stay with us. So we're blitzing through some important conversation with the State Treasurer, Seth Magaziner. Kat, throw me that pension headline. The word pension is everybody's holy grail around here. And of course, we've had pension reform, and I won't argue whether or not we should have settled. We did. It's spilt milk. But the pension reform was really for state pensions and local pensions that are managed by the state. We still have a bunch of pensions out there on a local level that are upside down and backwards. The governor chose, the now governor, then treasurer, chose not to make that one of her fights last time around. You're sitting in the catbird seat now. Are you going to do anything about that?
So it is something we're looking at, and I've been in contact with a number of municipal leaders that have locally run pension systems offering our assistance. I think the things that we can do are to put some of our staff expertise behind this issue and to help these cities and towns figure out what is the size of their problem, how much are they on the hook for, what could potential solutions look like. The locally administered pensions, unlike the state pension, the locally administered ones are dictated by contract, and the state can't necessarily come in and make them throw out the contracts. But what we can do at least is help them think through the problem and what possible solutions might be.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
During the campaign, you had guys like Angel Tavares, God bless him, terrific guy, but trying to argue, hey, listen, I settled my pension. I made my pension deal you know, but it was a completely different ballgame between what was a statutory issue on the state side and a contractual issue locally. Yet, in the same way that you're trying to get this debt management thing fixed, I think we need the same kind of mechanism when it comes to the pension situation, because the cumulative unfunded liability on the local side almost dwarfs that which we solved on the state side.
Yeah, and I don't think this is just a local issue. I think it is a state issue because, you know, when we're in a place where we're trying to attract businesses, rebuild the economy, we can't have more municipalities going bankrupt because of pension liabilities.
So should we be looking for you to do something quickly on that, or in the next in 2016?
Well, so I'm in the process now of communicating with a number of the municipal leaders, seeing what we can do to be helpful, what our needs are. In the short term, though, I'm focused on bringing some oversight to the state's debt and bringing some reform in that arena.
All right, so it's debt first, pension second. I think the pension thing's an emergency. You did change the college-bound fund player there. Well, I already drained my account. I wasn't getting much ROI, to be honest with you. Is that why?
Well, it's part of why we made the change. Yeah, so the College Bound Fund, for viewers who aren't familiar, it's a great program. It helps families save for college, and you can invest that money, and then when it's time to spend it, you don't have to pay capital gains taxes on the investment income. It's a tax-efficient way to save for college. Rhode Island actually has one of the largest programs of its kind in the country. Every state has one, but we have one of the largest, because we've been able to market it to other states. And what we do is we charge a very small fee just to the out-of-state folks, 0.1%, which is now going to fund scholarships at the Rhode Island colleges and universities. The problem is what you mentioned. In the last few years, despite the fact that we have this big, successful program, we've gotten dinged for the performance not being very good, the fees being a little higher than they should be, and we had started to see the number of accounts decline. So we made a change. We hired a great new firm called Invesco to manage the College Bound Fund for us. Invesco is a company that manages low-cost ETFs, like index funds. They're growing very rapidly. They have a great national network, and I think it's going to help the program regain some of its strength.
All right, listen. Has this been like going to the dentist for you? Are you having fun?
I'm having a great time.
Where the hell were you during the campaign?
Oh. Well, you were actually, I'm glad you know, on the day I announced, you were one of the first interviews I did.
It was a tough one.
And it was back when,
on the radio.
but I mean,
it was rat-a-tat-tat.
At a time when most people didn't think I had a chance of winning, you had me come on, and I do appreciate that. And I'm glad to be back now.
Look, I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad you didn't wait 3 years to come back in case you want re-election, because that process is insulting. But just when you go away from this, could you just understand that no candidate, whether they've won or lost, ever wins by, you know, picking and choosing. People watch these shows, they think I'm as problematic as you are. So if we're going to have a good battle every once in a while, you shouldn't run from it. I'm glad you're here. I didn't bring you in here to school you. What I did, the people want to hear from you. But you know, it's insulting to the viewers, not to me, that we make 32 requests in a campaign and you don't show up on the TV side. Having said that, it's water under the bridge, right?
Yeah, glad to be here.
We'll get some work done
glad
together.
Glad to be here, and I'll be back.
All right, save us some money, will you?
Absolutely.
All right, the State Treasurer, ladies and gentlemen. Final word when we come back. Stay with us. You know, it's taken a while to get the State Treasurer in here. That was a constructive session, and that's really what we're about, having constructive sessions. Regardless of what my opinions may be here, there, politically, legislatively, financially, you need to hear from these people. And for those of you who hesitate from time to time on the state level, it's about doing the best for the viewer. Okay? We'll see you on the radio tomorrow at noon on WPRO. Good night.